like set the mood or the table. Wes probably knows more about McCarthy's time in East Tennessee as anybody in the world. And Sarah's doing really exciting stuff about the medieval influences that show up in his work in really unexpected ways. But let me say a couple words. One, as probably a lot of you know, Cormac McCarthy was not born in Tennessee, but he moved here when he was 4 years old. He grew up in a Catholic community in Knoxville, lived in South Knoxville, pretty much on the way to Sevierville, Martinville Pike there. And his first 4 novels are often called his Tennessee novels. And we're going to talk about McCarthy's Tennessee period today. Like I said, I'm just going to set the mood. One of the things that interests me with McCarthy is the many ways, even though he's in some ways an outsider to East Tennessee communities, he clearly loved the people he met and got to know in Tennessee. And he listened very carefully to the voices and stories and language of the region. One of the things that's come out in research recently is that he apparently kept a folder of stories that he heard people telling that he would jot down, maybe make his own a little bit, but he would just keep them in a folder separated from his books, but then pull from that folder and incorporate some of these stories into his book. So really the voices he heard around Tennessee were central to the stories he wanted to tell in his early
graduation. After his discharge from the Air Force, he returned to Knoxville and the university in the spring of '57, but did not complete his degree, as Bill has already mentioned. After the graduation of his girlfriend and poet, Lee Holloman, in December 1960, the couple moved to Chicago to write and work. And then in the fall of 1962, they moved to Sevier County, to what Lee described as a shack in the Smoky Mountains. The place was located on Walden Creek Road and owned by Dr. Charles Walden and his wife, Edward Wood. Because the Waldrop house did not have adequate heat, Cormac decided to build 2 fireplaces before the onset of winter. In September '62, Cormac learned that the childhood home of James Agee, which was located in Knoxville, was being torn down, and he acquired salvaged bricks from that house that he used in the construction of the fireplaces. The original structure on Walden Creek Road was demolished in 2004 and has now been replaced. And unfortunately, the fate of the old Agee bricks is unknown. Lee and Cormac's son, Cullen Chase, was born on November 30th, 1962 in Fort Sanders Presbyterian Hospital in Knoxville, even though the couple was living in Sevier County at the time. They separated in July or August of '63, and Cormac continued to live on Walden Creek until December of that year, when he moved to Asheville, North Carolina, to live with some old Knoxville friends. First with Linnell and John Holly, and then later with Gary Goodman. Cormac moved around a lot, but then he moved to New Orleans for a while from November '64 to March '65, and then he moved back to Knoxville in May of '65, and he was awarded the American Academy of Arts and Letters fellowship that provided for a travel grant for him. And in December of '65, he set sail for Ireland. And on board the ship, he met Annie Delisle, who was working as an entertainer on board the ship. They fell in love and were married in England in 1966. The couple lived on the island of Ibiza for about a year before returning to the Knoxville area. And they first lived on South Hollow Road in Rockford, which is in Blount County, and then later on Light Pink Road in Louisville, which is also in Blount County. And it was there that Cormac converted an old dairy barn into their home, while Annie worked as a dance instructor in Maryville. Annie and Cormac split up in 1976 or so, and Cormac traveled west to do research for his later Western novels.
Suttree and Blood Meridian, his last two, and I would argue Blood Meridian is at least kind of a midway Tennessee novel, because we see the kid moving from Tennessee to New Mexico. Both of those have like overt quotes from different translations available. So in the original manuscripts for Suttree, he introduces the novel setting with that italicized scene, invoking imagery from like a cave-like environment, and in the original notes it's like a Grendalian cave to explore kind of the darkness of the mind and of Knoxville. And the quote that is in the kind of the margin is, "He knows his own dark lake that lies in silence, where the wind's forbidding fingers are not even heard, and deep and cold these waters, in the caves she covers where Grendel lurks." And Michael Lake Cruz noted in his book, Books Are Made of Books, that this is a quote from the Francis Martin Vermeer translation, which came out in 1910. And I will add that there was a copy at the UT Library found in 1956, which he could have checked out when he came back in 57. I currently have it checked out. They may get it back. I didn't find any writing in it, but I think it's interesting that I can place it there at least.
I was probably going to save this, but the one, they made a movie in Knoxville in 1965 called The Fool Killer. And, it's available on YouTube if anybody wants to watch it. And that was Helen Eustace, I think, who wrote the novel in the 50s. And there are so many similarities, but in at least the beginning of the book. Now, I know he got a lot of the Blood Meridian stuff from other sources, but there's a character in her book, this Fool Killer character, which is apparently a figure from Appalachian folklore. There's several writers who do, I think O. Henry did it, and Stephen Vincent Benet and others who did it. But in her book, the young boy is kind of more picaresque. The young boy follows along with the Fool Killer, who's in her book is a giant, sort of similar to Judge Holden. So have you, but I've never seen anybody else in anything kind of make that connection between at least her kind of version of the Fool Killer and Blood Meridian and the Judge Holden character.
That's really interesting.
I think you're the first. So yeah, I haven't heard that. There are, as you said, some historical models and sources that some of the characters in Blood Meridian and some of the story are based off of, but I like that, but clearly it doesn't track one-to-one, so I think that idea of a giant makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'll have to get that detail. Yeah.
Kind of an unfair and ridiculous question, and I apologize, but in terms of his process of writing, do you find that he's using literature as his primary inspiration and then finding local stories to fill that, or is it vice versa? Is it more like he has a story to tell based on whatever, and then draws from a literary background to find structure or purchase for the story? Or is it just randomly sprinkled like
Yeah, I
color?
would like to hear other people's thoughts. My quick thought is that he has his story, the literature feels a little bit more sprinkled in, like rarely can you track it throughout the whole thing, so maybe he thinks of ways to describe things. A lot of times the language, sometimes like he has this biblical voice that comes in sometimes and that captures the mood, so I think maybe he also has a medieval voice at certain times. And then the same thing with the local stories. I think, as I was trying to get at the beginning, he loves just to hear storytellers. I think he probably spent a lot of time on porches. We know he spent time in community bars and just liked to listen to people tell the stories, liked to talk with the people. And